Hello, it's here. So Genshin just announced that they will be giving out 4 free constellations of your choice every year. In this video, I'll be going through all 25 pickable characters constellations, their utilities, breakpoints, and recommended constellation choices. But before that, there are some fine prints that were not announced inside the v6.0 livestream. So let's start off with how will these free constellations be handed out. Starting in 6.0, there will be an in-game event where players can pick a constellation from a curated list of characters. Each event cycle lasts for 12 weeks, meaning this event will repeat roughly once every 3 months. However, this, of course, comes with a catch. Only characters released before v4.0 can be picked, but the Archons are excluded, as well as Kazuha, Yelan, and Albedo for some reason. You are not allowed to pick a character that you do not own. You are not allowed to pick the same character again once he has been chosen before. Also, you do not simply get this just by logging in. You will need to complete a set of missions first before you can claim the constellation of your choice. The missions are relatively simple, which is to complete 8 weekly missions within the 12 weeks event period, meaning you can skip up to 4 weeks before you are locked out of this event. These weekly missions consist of daily objectives, a choice of either doing your 4x daily commissions or spending 120 resin. You have to do this daily 5 times in order to count as a weekly mission completion. Basically, do your dailies 5 times a week, repeat this across 8 different weeks within the 12-week event period, and you're good. Some additional notes. You can choose to not pick a character once you have completed a cycle. It is stated that you may save your pick and select them again in future event cycles instead. This means that if you do not own a character yet, you can wait and pull for them in their rerun banner, and then pick the constellation from the event. However, as of v6.0, we do not know yet if the list will change, or whether characters will rotate out from the list, so proceed with caution if you do decide to save a pick. You can also utilize this system to pick a character that you already have at Constellation 6. This will give you a brand new Masterless Stellar Fortuna item, which you can use to uncap your characters to level 100. This event also stacks with an annual standard character selector, which can be useful in achieving C6 and beyond for the Masterless Stellar Fortuna item. Do remember that although Mizuki is in the standard character selector, she is not inside this constellation event since she was only released after v4.0. Now that we know how the system works, let's dive in and take a look at each character's constellations and breakpoints. Since these are mostly old characters, I'm sure that many of you already have varying amounts of constellations from C0 to C2 and maybe even more. So I will also cover their C4s and even C6 should you decide to pursue these characters even further. I'll be skipping most C3 and C5 as they are simply talent level upgrades and mostly insignificant, but I will still list the notable ones down, such as Yae C3 or Ayato C3, and etc. Timestamps will be included in the comments and description as well if you would like to jump to a specific character. To start off, if you have any of the above characters at C6, you should consider if you want to spend it to obtain a Masterless Stellar Fortuna instead. This item can be used to uncap any character of your choice, letting you upgrade your strongest team or your favorite character rather than being locked to the above roster's selection of old characters, some of which might even be outdated or power crapped already. If you would like to know a rough number on the damage increase via level uncapping, for characters that does not rely on transformative reactions, it is a 2.7% DPS increase overall between level 90 and level 100. For characters that rely on transformative or additive reactions, it can be as much as a 40% DPS increase. For Jin C1, the skill damage isn't anything noteworthy in the grand scheme of things. This is more of a quality life change if you do use the suction mechanic, and only properly utilized in 4 damage tech. C2 provides a very nice KOL for exploration with the move speed buff. In tandem with Animal Resonance, you essentially get 25% move speed in total. Attack speed can be amazing for certain characters like Ayato or Yoimiya. If you are lacking a Viridescent 4-piece support like Sucrose or Kazuha for those teams, this can be a rather good constellation to have. Do note that this constellation only activates if Jin herself picks up the energy particles, so she needs to be on field in order to refresh the buff duration, which could mess up energy funneling strategies. C4 adds 40% animal rest threat to her burst, only relevant for animal carry teams such as Xiao, Wanderer, or Hazel. However, those teams already have rather competitive alternatives such as Faruzan, Furina, Xianyun, or Bennett. C6 gives a huge damage reduction for the team, which is nice in ensuring no one gets one-shotted within the field. However, there is not much use for it as Genshin's endgames rewards offense rather than defense. None of Jin's constellations are worth going for since their users are all pretty niche. Her base kit is sufficient enough to perform her support roles. If you still want to invest in a Jin for your team, consider C2 for the movement plus attack speed buffs, or C4 for animal shred. C1 is basically 15% damage bonus when enemy is below 50% HP. C2 offers a nice pair of attack percentage and attack speed boost, but with a somewhat annoying condition. Do note that this is worded wrongly. It only takes effect when Diluc gets hit, meaning Furina's HP drain would not trigger this. However, hits while shielded do still trigger this translation. C4 increases his skill damage percentage if cast within 2 seconds in succession. Diluc does not rely too much on his skill for damage, and it can mess up his attack rotations if you were to prioritize casting his skills within 2 seconds before the buff expires. C6 offers a big damage percentage and attack speed boost, but only for normal attack Diluc. Plunge Diluc would not get much mileage out of this, since both stats would not apply to plunge attacks. Even if running Yelan or Xingqiu, you will also just animation cancel the normal attacks in between the plunges anyway. For normal attack Diluc, C6 is recommended for the biggest damage boost that Diluc can obtain, along with the attack speed boost, which will make him way more smooth to pilot. Consider C2 as a stopping point for the attack percentage and attack speed boosts, although you still need to get hit to trigger these effects. Do know that if you are using the Battle Pass Claymore, Serpent Spine, you will need to run a Shielder if you want to activate both C2 and Serpent Spine passive together. For Plunge Diluc, I would recommend skipping the constellations here. All of Diluc's constellations do not provide much other than just a very slight damage boost to Plunge Diluc. The Constellation Selector can be better spent on another character instead. However, if you really want to invest constellations for Plunge Diluc, only C1 and C2 offers any realistic damage boost for him. C1 provides Qiqi a much needed energy regen on her skill, because her skill doesn't provide any particles at all for some reason. However, it is still very conditional as you need an amulet debuff to be active on the enemy being hit. C2 gives Qiqi a slight damage boost to her on-field carry playstyle. C4's 20% attack reduction for enemies is pretty useless in the grand scheme of things, as Genshin's endgame modes rewards offense over defense. C6 lets you jump scare people by reviving them with a burst, although with a cooldown of 15 minutes. Arguably one of the nicest and unique constellations to have in co-op. In single player, it can be nice to have a backup to save you some time if your characters die, but it is really not necessary, as you can simply retry the endgame modes with no penalty. You really shouldn't invest in Qiqi as her constellations aren't all that great, and she is considered as one of the weaker characters in the game, unfortunately. But if you really want to, for Qiqi support, C1 can help elevate Qiqi's abysmal energy generation, C6 for the co-op team-wide revive shenanigans. For Qiqi on field carry, C2 is the only constellation that offers any damage boost for Qiqi, so just get that. C1 offers a small damage boost for the team for all Hydro-related reactions. Do know that Lunar Charge has also been included in here as well, meaning that all future Hydro-related reactions can be expected to be included in here as well. Do know that the freeze duration extension is still bugged as of v5.8. C2 lets Mona proc a free charge attack at a 20% chance, slightly improving her overall damage. With enough pyro application, you can even vaporize this charge attack plus her normal attack back to back. C3 increases her burst multiplier, but do note that the damage percentage bonus portion does not improve further beyond level 10. This constellation is only for people looking for screenshot damage numbers. C4 offers an amazing 15% crit rate to the entire team against Omen debuffed enemies, which is generally utilized in freeze teams where the Omen duration can be extended. Example, a TTDS TOTM C4 Mona is a competitive budget option for Skirk team. C6 is more of a quality of life upgrade for exploration, letting you sprint from place to place and immediately clearing mobs out. This won't see much use in endgame modes since you won't be sprinting long enough to recover the buff. C4 offers an incredible 50% crit rate to the team, and is extremely good in freeze teams as the frozen status can extend the Omen duration. Consider C1 for a slight damage boost to all reactions, and C3 only if you're looking to do screenshot damage numbers. Yep, do it. Pick Keqing. Okay, on a serious note, Keqing's constellations are pretty weak, and I would not suggest any non-Keqing mains to pick her. C1 gives an additional 1 to 2 electro hits on her skill. It does not have a separate ICD, meaning you only get an extra aggravate proc roughly every 2 to 3 skills, which isn't very significant. C2 provides 1 extra energy particle every 5 seconds, which is irrelevant as Keqing isn't really stuffed for energy. Some of you might remember that this passive was bugged for a long time, but it has been fixed as of v3.3. C4 is basically 25% attack bonus after Keqing triggers and reaction. C6 is basically 24% electro damage bonus, similar to Missplitter. Although Keqing's constellations do offer various boosts to her damage, it is all very minor, and the Constellation Selector could be better spent on another character instead. However, if you are a fellow Keqing main, do consider C4 and C6 as the breakpoints, as they offer the biggest damage boost out of all her constellations. C1 gives Klee additional attacks, which is a small damage boost and more Pyro Aura for teammates to react off. For Vaporized Carry Klee, this could mess up the Vaporized rotations as Klee could apply too much Pyro Aura, overwriting Hydro Applicators. C2 as a defense threat to Klee's skill. Defense threat is one of the rarest stats in Genshin. At 23% defense threat, that alone would translate to around 13% of undiluted damage increase to an entire team. This is frequently used in speedrun and whale teams. In conjunction with TTDS and Pyro Resonance, you can even bring her in as a quick swap support for most bosses in endgame modes, like Abyss or Stygian Onslaught. C4 as an additional Pyro Explosion upon swapping during her burst. A straight up buff to carry Klee's damage as 555% is a very high multiplier by itself. Do note that you may occasionally miss the Vaporize for this nuke as the Hydro Aura might get cleared by Klee's burst. For support Klee, this lets her apply additional 2 units of Pyro Aura on swap after bursting. C6 mainly helps a little bit with regenerating energy for the team since Klee takes up a lot of field time, and also adding a very underwhelming 10% Pyro damage bonus for a C6. For on-field Klee, C2 is recommended as the defense threat provides the biggest damage boost and benefits the entire team as well. Consider C4 for the additional nuke on swap after burst, and C6 for elevating team energy requirements. For quick swap support Klee, C2 is necessary to enable support Klee playstyle, otherwise she offers too little compared to other support characters. None of the constellations are significant for support Klee. Using her burst will also steal field time from her teammates, which could be detrimental as her C2 defense threat only lasts for 10 seconds. C1 reduces Xiao's skill cooldown by 20%, a very nice quality of life constellation to alleviate his downtime issues due to the nature of his skill cooldown. C2 provides 4 energy per kill with the Riptide debuff, which is nice to have, but Xiao doesn't really face any major energy issues. C3 boosts Xiao's elemental skill level, which is a big damage increase since Xiao mostly relies on his skill multipliers. The additional Hydro hits from C4 could mess up Xiao trying to vaporize his burst, and also making Pyro harder to swallow in certain teams. C6 technically allows Xiao to have his skill up permanently, but a proper team would still be switching characters to set up their skills anyway. So in practice, this is mostly just a quality of life constellation and offers no real damage increase in proper rotations. C1 helps make Xiao way smoother to play by lowering his downtime, and C3 is his highest personal damage increase. Consider C4 if you want to apply even more Hydro Aura for team reactions, but at the cost of not being able to consistently vaporize his burst. C1 is basically an energy refund after using burst, which can be considered a DPS loss depending on the team. C2 offers a bulky stacking damage increase to Albedo's burst, but some teams will still opt to ignore his burst. C3 increases his skill talent level. Since most of Albedo's damage come from his skill, talent levels are welcome. C4 adds a plunge damage percentage buff to the team. However, plunge teams like Xiao or Xianyuan teams generally already have better options other than Albedo. C6 adds a small team-wide damage increase, but requires the crystallized reaction shield in order to take effect. If the party member swaps out, they lose the buff as well since the crystallized shield is no longer on them. C3 helps provide a sizable damage increase to his elemental skill, which is his main contribution to most teams. Consider C1 or C2 if you opt for his burst playstyle, C4 only if you need an additional support for plunge teams. C1 offers a very nice pair of energy regen and also cryo rest reduction, boosting her own damage and support capabilities as well. C2 adds an additional charge for skill. Double skill means double the energy particles, which can be amazing in endgame modes like Stygian Onslaught, where you start with no energy, and also allows her to spam her skill more flexibly in rotations. C4 adds a solid ramping damage percentage bonus to the entire team during her burst, only useful for support Ganyu, as on-field Ganyu would usually not burst to upkeep Pyro Auras for melting her charge attacks. C6 is an extremely strong constellation for front-loading a lot of damage within a short window, widely used in speedruns and also changes your playstyle entirely. For Melt Ganyu, C1 is a solid boost to her charge attacks, and C6 lets Ganyu front-load her entire kit within seconds for insane amounts of damage. Other than that, her other constellations buffs her burst mainly, and Melt Ganyu does not want to burst in order to preserve Pyro Aura for melts. For freeze or support Ganyu, C1 and C2 are both great stopping points, providing great energy regen options for her and cryo shred for the team. Although it's only 6 seconds long, C4 also provides a sizable damage boost to the entire team. Consider C6 as it helps minimize Ganyu's field time for other characters, letting you squeeze out even more damage within your rotations. C1 adds an additional charge to Xiao's skill, meaning he can now store up to 3 charges. This helps Xiao to build energy towards his initial burst, especially in stages where you start with no energy like Stygian Onslaught. However, his rotations are not long enough to generate a cooldown for a third skill charge, meaning the third additional charge is irrelevant in subsequent bursts. C2's extra energy recharge for Xiao when off-field is a small quality of life enhancement if you are not able to reliably pre-funnel his skill energy before bursting. C4 is 100% defense bonus for Xiao. Huh? C6 is an insane constellation allowing Xiao to spam his skill, completely changes Xiao's playstyle against multiple enemies. His main damage source shifts from plunge attacks to elemental skills, arguably one of the more powerful Constellation 6 in the game. C6 is recommended for the insane damage boost and the change in playstyle, but only against 2 or more enemies. Consider C1 to alleviate starting energy issues in game modes with 0 starting energy. C1 removes stamina cost on Hu Tao's charge attacks. Arguably one of the better C1s in the game, it allows her to dash cancel all of the charge attacks without running out of stamina, squeezing in even more damage into her rotations. This also negates the need for jump cancelling, which many players can find challenging to perform. However, I know there are players out there who are not interested in neither jump cancelling nor dash cancelling, so this will only be a quality of life improvement in stamina management for those of you. C2 adds a slight increase to her DOT damage, which is insignificant. C4 adds a 12% crit rate buff on defeating enemies, but only for her teammates. Hu Tao does not benefit from this. C6 is a constellation generally only sought after by whales min-maxing their crit values and speedrunning contents. In longer battles, this may not be as valuable as it has an annoying activation condition and a long cooldown of 60 seconds. This constellation can also serve as an extra life against single fatal attacks, but she can still die against multiple hits. C1 is recommended for the removal of stamina cost on charge attacks and also enabling the dash cancelling playstyle. C6 only if you are min-maxing your crit with no crit rate and full crit damage, or if you want the extra survivability. C1 basically adds 30% physical damage bonus during her burst duration, as you will do a whole skill right before you burst. C2 is unnecessary as Eula's rotation would still want her to do tap, tap, hold, and not hold, hold, hold. C3 increases Eula's burst talent level, and majority of her damage is condensed into a burst, making this a sizable damage increase. C4 basically provides 25% burst damage bonus when the enemy is under 50% HP. This can be useless at times if Eula's burst explodes while the enemies are above 50% HP. C6 is Eula's strongest constellation and allows her to reach max stacks, dealing one of the highest base damage numbers in the game. Eula can also swap out earlier, improving the team's overall rotation flexibility. C6 offers the biggest damage increase and unlocks Eula's full damage potential. Consider C1 and C3 as stopping points for a nice damage increase. C1's cooldown reduction is a small quality of life enhancement for on-field Ayaka. It can help her to squeeze in 2 skills per rotation for more energy, whereas Quick Swap Ayaka will not utilize this cooldown reduction at all. C2 adds 2 smaller elemental bursts onto the sides of the original burst. A very solid constellation adding chunks of additional damage and also turning Ayaka into one of the best cryo applicators in the game, which is very useful for characters with no ICD such as Xiangling or plunge attackers like Diluc, who melts on every hit. C3 increases Ayaka's burst talent level. Since majority of Ayaka's damage is in her burst, it provides a sizable damage boost for her. C4 reduces the defense of enemies hit by her burst. Defense Shred, being one of the rarest stats in the game, massively increases both Ayaka's and her entire team's damage. Assuming no other source of defense shred, 30% defense shred would translate to around 18% of undiluted damage increase. C6 grants Ayaka a massive damage percentage bonus onto her charge attacks, but only once every 10 seconds. This is only significant if Ayaka is ran with Shenhe, as Shenhe's quill buffs can take full advantage of this huge damage percentage bonus. Otherwise, most of Ayaka's damage is on her elemental burst, and you won't see any big changes with this C6. It does also come with a very noticeable cosmetic glow effect on Ayaka's right hand. C2, C3, and C4 are all breakpoints that increases Ayaka's damage significantly. C4 with the defense shred also fully enables support Ayaka playstyle. Consider C6 only if you're pairing Ayaka with Shenhe, otherwise the damage increase isn't anything noteworthy. C1 gives a longer burst marker duration and a 20% attack buff only when defeating an enemy marked by her burst. This is just too underwhelming and conditional to make use of. C2 is basically a 25% power damage buff to Yoimiya. C4's CD reduction is a nice QOL, but with only 8 seconds of base downtime, Yoimiya shouldn't need the extra CD reduction at all in a proper team rotation. C6 is Yoimiya's strongest constellation, adding extra shots to her normal attacks. However, this can mess up vaporized rotations due to ICD being shared between her normal attacks and the C6 extra attacks, since the extra attacks have lower multipliers. But it is very potent in teams such as Overload. C6 is the greatest boost to Yoimiya's personal damage overall, Consider stopping at C2 if you are looking to just boost Yoimiya's damage without investing too much in her constellations. C1 adds extra attacks during her burst. This attack has a separate ICD, allowing even more Hydro application during Kokomi's burst state. Do note that this only triggers on the final sequence of a normal attack string, so you might need to make a mental note to always finish the attack string in order to fully utilize this constellation. C2 gives Kokomi even more healing, but only when teammates are below 50%. As Kokomi's healing is already very good in her base kit, this is rather insignificant. The under 50% HP condition makes this even worse, as no one should be dropping below 50% if Kokomi is already on the team anyway. C4's attack speed bonus is very noticeable for Kokomi since Catalyst users don't suffer from hit lag, and the energy regen is great following her energy requirements. C6 basically provides a big 40% Hydro damage bonus during her burst. For quick swap Kokomi, most of Kokomi's constellation buffs on field playstyle, so if Kokomi is played as a quick swap support, I'll just skip her constellations altogether. For on field Kokomi, the best constellations here are C1 for more damage and Hydro applications, and C4 for even more damage, more Hydro applications, and also energy regeneration. Consider aiming for C6 only if you want to boost Kokomi's personal damage even further. C1 is a quality of life upgrade and an overall damage boost, giving Itto more stacks to perform charge attacks upon using his burst. C2's CD reduction and energy regen are very nice quality of life upgrades, making Itto's rotation more flexible. Damage-wise, this does not really change anything in an optimal rotation. Additionally, you can only get a full benefits with Itto plus 2 Geo teammates. As of v5.8, Itto has several team comps that may not even run triple Geo anymore, further devaluing this constellation. C4 provides a nice attack percentage and defense percentage buff to the entire team for 10 seconds once Itto's burst ends. His burst has a downtime of 7 seconds, and it snapshots his defense stats on use. So if you burst again within 10 seconds from the previous burst ending, Itto can still benefit from the defense percentage portion here. C6 is basically plus 70% crit damage and 50% chance of non-consuming his stacks when he's doing his charge attacks during his burst, potentially allowing him to do infinite charge attacks. A very nice damage boost and potentially changing up his playstyle. C1 is probably the best stopping point to improve his rotation plus damage potential. Other than that, C6 is the only other constellation worth considering to maximize his damage. This is a costly investment as C2 and C4 are way too conditional, so think ahead if you want to go beyond C1. C1 grants a second charge for Shenhe's skill, allowing her to generate twice the energy particles. It is especially useful in game modes where you start with 0 energy, such as Stygian Onslaught. This also lets Shenhe use both her tap and hold skills together in order to activate both of her Ascension 4 passive at once. C2 extends her burst duration by 1.5 times, giving her 6 additional ticks of burst damage and also adding another 15% increased cryo crit damage buff on top to everything that it already provides. It is a very solid support constellation as it extends Shenhe's debuff window, giving your team even more damage opportunities. As Shenhe buffs are in her elemental skill, talent levels from C3 slightly increases the attack percentage conversion further, from 82% to 97%. C4 grants Shenhe stacks based on the number of quills consumed by the team. She typically gets around 20-ish stacks per rotation, so it is unrealistic to get a full damage bonus from this constellation. Shenhe is also not dealing majority of the damage in the team, so this constellation is not as significant. C6 makes it so that Shenhe's quills have no cap, but only if the character is using normal or charge attacks. So this will not work for characters with high burst hit counts, such as Ayaka or Ganyu, unless you opt to play them without their bursts. But for fast normal attack and charge attack characters, such as Skirk or Risley, this constellation can be incredibly potent. C1 double skill for the energy regen, and also activating both buffs for Ascension 4 passive if needed. C2 for the longer uptime, and extra crit damage buff on her burst. Consider C3 for a slight boost to Quill's flat damage bonus, and C6 only if you are supporting a normal attack or charge attack based cryo carry. C1 is basically an energy refund after bursting. This greatly decreases Yae's energy requirement, going down from needing 200% energy regeneration to as low as 140%. An extremely nice constellation to ensure an off-field Yae can burst every rotation. Also, the energy regen triggers irregardless of whether enemies were hit, so it is a guaranteed 24 energy refund with 3 turrets up. C2 boosts the turret's overall DPS by 25% and also extending its range by a lot. It becomes very comfy to play as all 3 turrets can reliably hit most targets, especially in large arenas or overload teams where enemies are bouncing everywhere. C3 provides a talent boost to her skill, and since Yae heavily relies on her turrets for damage, higher talent multipliers provides a nice damage increase. C4 basically adds 20% electro damage buff for the entire team. C6 adds an insane 60% defense signal onto her turret attacks. As mentioned several times, defense threat is one of the rarer stats. Assuming no other sources of defense threat present, ignoring 60% defense would translate to around 42% undiluted DPS increase by itself. C1 lets Yae burst burst consistently every rotation, C2 for the big damage and range increase on her turrets, C3 for even more damage increase via talent multipliers, C6 turns her into one of the strongest off-field damager in the game. Consider for C4 only if you're running Electro teammates such as Raiden or Fischl. C1 basically provides Ayato 40% damage bonus, only if the enemy is below 50% HP. This condition means that it is only effective half the time theoretically. C2 provides an extra stack to Ayato's skill, and max HP percentage means more damage bonus for his skill stashes. C3 increases his skill talent levels, and since Ayato heavily relies on his skill, this gives a big boost to his damage output. C4's attack speed here can allow Ayato to unleash around 3 more slashes per skill activation, further increasing his output. C6 offers the biggest damage boost among Ayato's constellation. It adds additional slashes to his initial slash, which is worth the multipliers of 6 normal slashes total together. If you are using Ayato as a quick swap support just for his burst, such as in Nilou Bloom or Solo Hydro in Freeze teams, you should skip all of his constellations as they are catered towards on-field Ayato. Ayato's constellations are rather straightforward. C2, C3, C4, and C6 are the best damage increase that Ayato can obtain, so you can treat those as the breakpoints. Other than above, nothing else is really noteworthy as his constellations don't really offer anything unique. C1 is basically a 15% crit rate buff, but only for his charge shots. His skill and burst does not benefit from this. C2 is basically 20% Dendro damage bonus for Tighnari. C4 provides bonus elemental mastery to the entire team after Tighnari uses his burst. EM buff is welcome in quickened teams, which Tighnari excels in, especially useful for crit-based characters like Yae or Fischl, as they will have little to no EM by themselves. C6 heavily decreases his field time, similar to Ganyu's C6. It also adds an additional arrow which has a separate ICD, meaning it will always trigger a separate quicken reaction. Depending on the teammates, however, the decreased field time may or may not be beneficial. For example, Fischl or Yae does not require any additional field time other than refreshing their skills. All of Tighnari's constellations are pretty good, so you may consider C1, C2, C4, or C6 as good stopping points. C1's attack speed increase coupled with 4-piece Thundering Fury set is very helpful in optimizing Cyno's attack combos. As Cyno needs to use his skill at specific timings during his burst, the lower cooldown can help ensure Cyno's skills are up on time. C2 is basically 50% electro damage bonus for Cyno, which is a big boost to his personal damage. However, do note that Cyno's overall damage output is split between his own attacks and reactions, so this constellation will be less effective in Hyper Bloom comps since elemental damage percentage bonus won't affect Hyper Bloom. C4 is only worth if his team is struggling with energy issues, which could be the case if your team has not enough energy recharge builds because Cyno takes up a lot of field time. C6 basically adds around 12 to 16 extra attacks from his Ascension 1 passive per rotation, resulting in a pretty significant damage increase. C1, C2, and C6 all offers great damage upgrades to Cyno's kit, but do note that many of Cyno's damage do come from Hyper Bloom or Aggravate reactions, which the constellations may not directly impact. Consider C4 only if you're struggling with energy on his teammates. C1's extra 6-second duration may not seem as big as it is in practice, since a second Hydro on fielder would normally get more Bloom ownership than Nilou. The extra uptime on her Hydro field is not as impactful. However, the longer duration is nice for ensuring constant Hydro applications even when swapping to other teammates, boosting the team's DPS overall. The damage bonus portion is only useful for players looking to play Crit or Vape Nilou. C2's Hydro and Dendro rest strats are very good stats to have. Since Anemo units are not allowed in Nilou Bloom team, this elemental rest strat is very nice in boosting the entire team's damage. C3's burst talent levels are useless for a Bloom Nilou, but it is a good damage increase for crits or Vape Nilou. C4 provides 15 energy from skill and another hefty 50% damage bonus for her burst. For Bloom Nilou, the energy regen can allow more iframes through usage of a burst, while the burst will start looking like an actual nuke for crits of Vape Nilou. C6 basically gives Nilou a hefty 30% crit rate and 60% crit damage buff. If you are looking to play crit or Vape Nilou to a full potential, this should be the end goal to work towards. For Bloom Nilou, C2 is the biggest damage increase for Bloom Nilou teams. Consider C1 for a small quality of life in a Hydro field uptime. For crit or Vape Nilou, C6 is extremely helpful to unlock her full potential, otherwise her kit is generally more suited towards Bloom playstyle. You can consider C1 and C2 as great low-cost stopping points, with C3 and C4 focusing on damage upgrades for her burst. C1's bonus attack speed allows him to throw in 2 more normal attacks into his rotations, as well as higher multipliers for the wind arrows from his passive. C2 adds up to 200% damage bonus to Wanderer's Burst. The rotation will change to burst only at the end of Wanderer's elemental skill duration in order to maximize this damage percentage buff. Wanderer's A4 passive is rather hard to control due to him possibly swirling elements and getting different buffs every time. C4 here lets Wanderer activate 1 additional buff from the unactivated elements, which can range from 0% to 15% damage increase. It is way too unreliable and considered more of a small quality of life boost. C6 is Wanderer's biggest DPS increase, providing additional animal attacks and also extending his skill duration. C6 is the biggest damage increase of all his constellations. You can consider C1 and C2 as good low investment stopping points. C1 pretty much fixes Dehya's low multipliers on her skills. A must get if you want to play Dehya as an on-field carry. With the HP scaling from C1, HP percentage substats will also become comparable to attack percentage substat for Dehya's damage. C2 increases her skill duration from 12 seconds to 18 seconds. Longer uptime improves her off-field support capabilities and also lowering the energy requirements as it generates more energy particles as well. C4's extra energy regen here can reduce Dehya's energy requirements by around 40% ER, allowing her to forgo energy percentage sense for attack or HP sense instead. The HP regen can also help with building Furina fanfare stacks, making this a nice quality of life enhancement for on-field carry Dehya. C6 is the biggest damage increase for on-field Dehya. As Dehya crits during her burst, her subsequent hits will have more crit damage and it also extends the duration of her burst. For on-field carry Dehya, C1 is essential to fix her low multipliers and C6 offers the biggest damage increase out of all the constellations. Consider C4 to let her min-max stats more efficiently and activate Furina fanfare stacking. For off-field support Dehya, C2 is the best here for the longest skill uptime. None of the other constellations should be considered as they don't really provide anything for support Dehya. C1 adds an additional charge to the skill, which is especially important in stages where you start with no energy, like Station Onslaughts. Holding up to 2 charges can also improve his flexibility in providing healing on demand. C2 grants Baizhu an additional Dendro application and healing every 5 seconds during his bursts. This however requires your active character to be hitting an enemy, but it is very flexible as even things like Ocean Hue Clam damage or Alternate Sprint still activates this constellation. A very solid constellation if Baizhu is the sole Dendro applicator in the team. C4 basically provides 80 elemental mastery buff to the entire team after Baizhu uses his burst. C6 grants additional shield creations, resulting in roughly 6 additional Dendro applications. Do note that the shield do not stack. It essentially just increases the refresh rate of the shields, which is only useful when tanking multiple attacks over time. C2 is the best stopping point for a slight damage increase, healing, and more importantly, increased Dendro applications. Consider stopping at C1 for the additional skill use, which can be helpful in game modes with zero starting energy. If you have made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching and I really appreciate all of you viewers. I'm also streaming every day on Twitch and YouTube, so feel free to join in to discuss more about Genshin's new upcoming updates or any other gacha games in general. I also like to give a shout out to Keqing mains for the comprehensive guides on almost every characters in the game, and also the Genshin fandom wiki page for the in-depth breakdown on every single hidden values in the game. Without those 2 sites, it would have been extremely hard to compile all the information for this video. Do let me know in your comments in the description. Pick Keqing. Okay.